Welcome, everyone. It's Career Happy Hour. I'm Andrew Beach, Executive Coach. I'm a teacher of self-education. I help professionals like you communicate your value to find great opportunities faster, whether you're working or not. I do that through a pragmatic process of branding, professional branding, planning, creating a career map, and effective networking, meaning going to market with your brand and identifying people that can potentially lead you where you want to go. And there's something interesting about that process, and that is people hire people. Let me say that again. People hire people. I haven't seen a resume hire a person yet. I haven't seen LinkedIn hire a person yet. These things still are in iteration, and certainly technology could take the place of a recruiter or a hiring process, but it's not likely. There's still something that's required before you actually receive an offer, and one of those things is the interview. So that's something we're going to talk about today. What I'd like you to do, though, is let me know where you're joining from, if you can hear the audio okay, and certainly if you're part of this Career Happy Hour community, you will be placing your LinkedIn profile in the chat and signaling to everybody here that you are indeed open to and ready to network with anyone that happens to tap you on the shoulder. Let's just call it that. If you put your LinkedIn profile in there, what you're signaling to everybody is you're open to that kind of contact. The other thing I'd ask, and certainly it's Friday, 3 o'clock Pacific time every week, share this out with someone you think might be interested in learning how to optimize their career or take a new trajectory, or as some people say, navigate the great resignation with grace and class. So that's something that I think many of us are probably thinking about, is how do I navigate that process? Certainly you can reach out to me on that. I do provide coaching services. So that's something, if you're interested, I am more than happy to have a conversation. You would just need to fill out an application and get on my calendar, and that's it. And there's only 3 required questions on the application. So if you're open to that, I'll put the link to the application on my profile, and you can very easily access it there if it's not in the description of this video already. The other side of this is answering your questions. Now, this Career Happy Hour thing is a lot more fruitful for you and for me if I can answer some of your direct questions. If you have questions, please put those in the comments box or wherever you're joining from today. It'd be really nice for us to see that you have some questions, and certainly you're not the only one likely that's going to have that question. And therefore, it's important that you have the courage to ask. Now, I understand that many of you may not want to ask publicly. So if that's you, there is a link in the description, and I'll actually put the same link into the comments stream here on LinkedIn, at least. And you'll have an opportunity then to join me live or ask a confidential question. You could certainly also private message me, and I can answer it on any subsequent or next week's live stream. Join via this link. Okay, there we go. So that should be there, and I'll put it over onto the YouTubes as well. So if you're joining by YouTube or Twitter or Facebook, you have the opportunity to use the link through those things. So I've now sent that to YouTube. It doesn't look like that goes over to Twitter for whatever reason. So wherever you're joining from, welcome. It's good to see you. We're going to get to the topic of conversation today, which is something I've been, certainly as a coach, I still have my eyes and ears open. And there are occasions where I get an opportunity to interview just to stay sharp and see if any of my philosophies, the things I know to be true, to actually be true. And when I go through an experience of interviewing, I then have the opportunity to empathize with a lot of the folks that I coach. So if you want to go ahead and join live through the link below, there is a private chat in the back office here, if you want to call it that, or what do they call it? The green room. You could call it the green room, I suppose. And then certainly if you want to join these live streams, I believe they actually broadcast in the background image of my profile. So if you just go to my profile page, you're welcome to watch from the profile page. So that's another way to access the live streams for anyone that does that kind of thing. So that said, the thing that was kind of on my mind as relates specifically to interviewing, and I guess to a certain extent, this could also apply to networking, is how much do you really share? How much do you really share at an interview? Because we could tell our whole life story. There may not be time for that at the interview. So we really have to maybe figure out individually and based on the situation and the people we're talking to, how much do we actually share? Not only that, but what do we share? What do we share about why we're looking or why we're looking to leave someplace? And, sometimes we have this filter where we feel like we have to rationalize or justify or in some way explain to someone else why it is we're looking for new opportunity, when in reality, it's less important that you tell them why and more important that you demonstrate motivation to be in their organization. There's a difference, right? There's a lot of reasons why you'd want to leave a place. I think it's important to have two lists: why you want to leave a place and maybe what's the exact opposite of that. And then the other side is why you want to join a place. And I think the hiring teams that you're interviewing with likely want to know about the latter. Why do you want to join this place? So they're asking a question not because they want to know why you're leaving an organization, which to some of them, they may be curious why, but they want to know that you're motivated and that you'll have longevity and that you have a reason for being in that interview. And this takes some practice for sure to pause and maybe lean into the silence, collect your thoughts, and then share that with the interviewer. And then the other side of this is, should you be more diplomatic? How much of the truth do you share without being too honest? I think there's a line there too, is that there's you telling the truth, and then there's you being overly honest about sharing all of the reasons why, all the motivations why, rather than just having a compelling story or narrative that might, how should I say this? That might be more palatable to your audience. And so what strategy would be best for that situation? If it's a HR person or a hiring team or a loop interview with the hiring manager and the executive leadership, right? So who are the people you're meeting with? And think about it from that perspective as well. So the first thing to recognize, and I have a list of, I think, 6, 7 things that I'll talk about here regards to how much you really share at an interview. And the first one is HR, right? The HR, talent acquisition, recruiter screening process, whatever you want to call this, that initial outreach is typically by HR. Now, it's not always. Sometimes you get a hiring manager, depends on the organization. But if it's HR, the objective when you're talking to HR is to get the next round of interviews, because they aren't making a decision on your candidacy, and the result of that interview is not likely an offer. The outcome of that interview is likely another interview, either with the hiring team, the hiring manager, a technical resource. There's a next round of interviews coming. And when I'm looking to share information with HR, I'm really looking to demonstrate how I meet the needs of the role, the organization, my motivation, in a way that positions me to get the next round of interviews. And that means we don't need to share all the technical detail or all the nuance of our decision-making process. We just need to give them enough information. It's funny, but when I was selling real estate, one of the things that my mortgage loan officer always used to tell me is, I don't share anything with the underwriter unless they ask for it. Because you want to get the loan approved as a mortgage underwriter. I, as a real estate agent, want to get the deal closed. So it wasn't uncommon that we would come to a crossroads with all this information, and the mortgage loan officer said, "Hey, I'm happy to take that information, but I'm not going to pass it to the underwriter." And that's something that I think applies here with HR, is that we're going to share just enough based on what they're asking for, not based on what we believe they need to know. Does that make sense? So sometimes we're being too honest and we're sharing too much instead of recognizing that this is just a gatekeeping professional that I need to please in order to get to the next round of interviews. So don't overshoot your target that way. There isn't a hiring decision going to be made at that interview. There's going to be a decision to get into the next round of interviews or not. That's the decision to be made. Now, once you get to the next round of interviews, or if you happen to be with the hiring team, right, the actual people in the operation, your peers and hiring managers, members of the team you would be joining, that's a different perspective altogether. And your objective there is to get the offer. And so we share things that are relevant, pertinent to that individual in order to get an offer. So we have to think the next step, the next phase, the next outcome from that process is an offer. And if we keep that in the back of our minds and we treat this like it's an offer generating activity, then we will prepare appropriately. And if it's a hiring manager, then we have some good stories. We make it relevant to them. We make it a dialogue. And it's not uncommon that we don't feel like we have permission to ask questions at the interview. And so don't think that you have to wait till the end to ask questions. The nice thing about asking questions is it elicits a dialogue. And I think that's what most of us want, right? We want the interview to feel like it's just a normal conversation, and that that's kind of loose, but also effective and productive. It doesn't need to be stringent and all these different things. There are some companies, and I never understood why even government does this, is that they can't respond to questions. And I think that's foolish, is that I, as an interviewer, want to feel like I'm part of that conversation as well. I want to feel like I can actually work with this person. And as an interviewee, right, if I'm the one being interviewed, I'm going to ask that person a question anyway, even though they say, I can't answer that question right now. So, but it makes them feel honored and respected that you asked it in the first place. And that's what matters. So don't be afraid. Don't be afraid to ask questions as an answer to a question. Ask questions as an answer to a question. That's interesting. Tell me more about that. What are you looking for in the candidate that would be perfect for you? What certain 2 or 3 things would you be most interested in knowing about, so I can provide you the right answer to that question? So that's something to practice, because sometimes that could be like, oh, well, I don't have an answer. That's what you're communicating. And I would not advocate you go down that path in that direction. So first is HR, right? Have a strategy there to get to the next interview. And then the hiring team, if you're going through a loop or there's some process, know what the process is. The objective is to get the offer. So that brings me to the next topic about how much do you really share, and that's relevancy. Now, everything related to you is relevant to you. So that means anything that you have experienced, any education you've been through, all of that is relevant to you. It just may not be relevant to your audience. And many people get that confused, is that they feel like everything that's relevant to me should be relevant to the other person. And it's never that way. There's always something more relevant to them than it is to you. More relevant to them than it is to you. So what is more relevant to them unless you ask a question? And that we just talked about, asking questions. So if you don't know, or you're not sure, and nobody has told you, and it's not in the job posting, you certainly want to ask questions about what's most important for them to know about you from the audience perspective. So whether that's HR, talent acquisition people, whether that's the hiring team, you want to make sure that you're asking them questions about what's relevant to them, so that you can provide them answers so they can make a decision to what? Move you on to the next interview, or give you an offer, or, put you in the short list, whatever. You put you in the list to check references. There's a lot of things that can happen at the end of these interviews, and we want them to be positive and productive for you. So take a moment and ask what's important to them, what's important to their company, and what's important to the role, so that you can then pull in the different accomplishment stories that are relevant to that situation, to that person. Because every person on the interview team may have a different need. They might have a different perspective. They may be assigned a different group of questions to ask, or a different leadership principle to focus on. So that's it. Relevancy. Think relevancy when you're in these conversations. That's the third thing. Fourth thing, distaste. Distaste. It's not uncommon that you feel free, or even sometimes obligated, to tell why you have a distaste for the work that you're doing now. And I think that's it's a trap. It's a trap. So when you're asked, why are you looking for work, or why would you want to leave XYZ company? Oh, well, they're not providing me any growth opportunities, or I feel like I've reached a dead end. And although those things may be true, I think it's better to think about this. We'll talk about this in a second. But the idea is we want to build a bridge from where we are performing at this organization, or where we came from, and what they're wanting done. That's what they're at. That's what they're looking for. Is they're seeing a gap somewhere between you, your expertise, your experience, your education, whatever that is, and what they need. And so the reason it's so much better if you can build a bridge between those things, so they can visualize you actually being on the job. And when you present something like, oh, well, there's no work, there's no opportunities for growth, I'm pigeonholed into a job title, I feel like my only option is to leave. No, talk about the virtue. Talk about the virtue of what you received from your employer. This is an extension. This opportunity here is an extension of what such and such company has provided me. They've provided me this. They've provided me that. In fact, you want to flatter your prior employer as much as possible. Why? Because even though it may be personal to you, and you might have some feelings about what you've experienced with that employer, and I've been there too, right? This is it's been now 20 years since funny enough, 20 years since I was laid off from a role. It's the first time I'd ever been laid off in my career. And it was an opportunity for me to kind of reminisce and think about that today, a little nostalgia. But good to see you, Tracy. Let's see here. It looks like Tracy has a contribution. Thank you so much for joining and making a contribution. It says, conversations are so helpful during the interview process. It helps the interviewer and the candidate to establish relationship. I think what you're really saying there is rapport. It's the first step to building trust. And trust is a productive relationship, because we could have all kinds of relationships, right? Surface level relationships, best friend relationships. So just having a relationship, I don't think is good enough. You want to establish rapport, which leads to trust. And that is a productive or effective relationship. So thanks for that call out. She also says, Tracy, thank you. Employers want to hire all of you, not 25% of you. Yes, I would say that is true. However, if they knew all of you, would they hire you? That's the bigger question. They may only want to know about the 25%, and they'll learn the 75% later. So, I would say mostly what you said there is true, and I appreciate that contribution. I would give some consideration that sharing all of you with them at the interview is kind of like grabbing all of the skeletons out of your closet on a first date with someone that you're attracted to or want to have some kind of long-term relationships with. Yes, good. Yes. So it's not, it's sometimes, it's funny you say that, Tracy, because sometimes we feel like we have to rationalize our decision, and we have to in some way say, hey, I'm not getting something over here, therefore I'm coming to you. And now I'm positioned as if I'm running away from something. And that's not as compelling for an employer, for sure. If you're running away from something, then would you do the same to us? Would you run away from our opportunity, from our organization? We're going to invest time, energy, money, resources to bring you on board, to upskill you, to whatever training's involved there. We're going to give you a mentor and all this guidance, and we're going to give you compensation and benefits right there. And then there's the cost of hiring. We're going to do all these things for you, and you're going to run away if there's something you don't like. And so I think that's a dangerous path. It's a very, very dangerous path. So, one of the things we could encourage you to do is prepare, get some advice or some counsel from a coach like me. I have a very, how would you say, structured, I wouldn't say structured, but well-developed interview intensive program that a lot of people have had great success with. It's a 90-minute session and it's intense. I mean, we talk through a lot of things that you hadn't thought of. It positions you with confidence. And if that's something you're interested in, certainly you can find that on my website. If you go to andrewbeach.com and just search for interview intensive, then you'll see it. But this idea of sharing your distaste for what you're not getting from an employer, I think is a dangerous approach. And it's not something that will land well with everybody that you deliver it to. And therefore it's not something that I advocate you do, because you don't know what that other person's perspective or how they're going to respond to that might be. So always be flattering to a prior employer and look at it as a bridge. Now that's the other part of this, that, how much do you really share at the interview? Because where you've been is certainly, again, relevant to you, but it might be something that is too much, right? There, you might have too much experience, and you run the risk of appearing overqualified. Now, I know that seems strange, because overqualified people ought to be the ones that get hired, but that's not the perception of the hiring team. The perception of the hiring team is often, not always, but often, that overqualified equals expensive, bored, flight risk. You're going to run away as soon as there's something better come along, right? There's a lot of things that they're thinking when we're talking about overqualified. So, overselling or overshooting the target and sharing too much information is something I would also not advocate. I would try to make sure it's relevant, not only in terms of the expertise, but the quantity and quality of expertise. If you're trying to sell somebody on your skill, we don't want to overshoot the target too much, because that might just serve to disqualify you based on perception. But the idea here is where you've been and where you're going, and you visualize that as a bridge, as we talked about before, is how you want to position all of the answers in your interview. And certainly there's a process to that and a framework, and I have all that figured out. But they ask, you answer in a way that's relevant, building a bridge, and then you ask a similar question back. And that's something to practice. It's not easy. It's not something that you can develop at once and have it forever. It's a process. And so it drives me nuts. Drives a lot of the people around me nuts, because I will answer them a question and they're expecting a longer answer, but I turn it back. As a good coach, this is just a skill you have to learn to become a good coach, that I had to learn too. I didn't have all that skill early on, but it's they ask a question, you answer, give them some advice, and you ask a question back, and that will keep the dialogue rolling. And certainly sharing too much. There's a lot of technical people that I've helped interview prep for, and they like to share all the minutia. And not that the minutia isn't important to you. It's just maybe not important to the audience you're interviewing with, number one. And number two, you only have so much time to do an interview, folks. If it's 30 minutes and you're carrying on for 5 or 10 minutes just answering one question, then you're not going to have time to finish the interview, and they're going to feel like they're not engaged or part of the interview. And therefore, you know what? I don't think I can work with this person. So be cautious of that. We don't want to overwhelm people with our stories and the volume of data and information we present to them. We can certainly provide a portfolio, a leave behind. There's other things we can do there. But that's something I would certainly think about and prepare for. So that's 5 things. So the next thing that I think is often overlooked too is people don't give enough time, energy, and effort to create a strong icebreaker presentation of who you are, why you're here, what do you want to get out of the job, and covering all those bases in 2 minutes or less. And if you create a really strong icebreaker that covers those 5 or 6 things, right? What is my strength? What do I bring to the table in this? Kind of like a verbal cover letter, really. And what am I looking? How am I looking to be developed through this role? So now I have that pause. Remember the positive, flattering presentation on your employer. So it states your strength, why you're there, why you're looking for work, maybe how you want to be developed, and then certainly the future part of it is asking a question related to that person in the context of your conversation. So there's typically a five components that I help people prepare for when we're talking about this, and we spend a good amount of our strategy session talking about a strong icebreaker. This front end question, tell me about yourself. Why are you here? What is Andrew all about? I mean, it could be any of a number of different questions before you get into the formal process called interview, where they have a list of questions they have to ask you because the HR person maybe gave them those questions, or they determined those were the best questions to ask because that's what Google told them to ask, and that sort of thing. But you can really set the table well for a very successful interview if you can have that strong icebreaker. Often some of the questions they may ask later might never come up because you already answered them up front. And their question in their mind, if it's left unanswered till the end of the interview, might be a reason to disqualify you. So there's something to think about there. If there's something you don't have in the job description, how honest are you about not having it? And how much of that do you share in your icebreaker to say, I'm really excited. I've started. I would never say I'm looking to be developed. I'm looking for you to provide me this. I've started developing a skill already, taken some LinkedIn learnings, doesn't matter. At least you've taken a step to start a skill, started getting skills in this space that I'm looking to grow through this role. So it's not something I would encourage you to use that phrase, and I'm looking for you to develop me in this space. I'm going to say, hey, I am developing myself in this space, and I look at this opportunity as an extension of that to grow it even further. So that's what setting the table can really do. You approach that with strength and intention, and you'll often find that people receive that really well. Hey, Stephen, good to see you. Sorry. Hey, don't be sorry that you're late. I'm just glad you're here. Most of the people just watch the replay, and I'm okay with that. But I'm here to answer questions. So if you have any questions at all about career, about leadership, about negotiating offers, interviewing, networking, professional branding, any kind of planning, how do I plan or map out my career, then please put that in the comments box on the platform that you're joining from, and I'd be happy to answer. So good to see you, Steve. Thank you for putting your LinkedIn profile in the comments. It's a way for all of us to maybe connect with you and have a good conversation, because networking, truthfully, is hard enough, isn't it? Actually reaching out to people and having a compelling outreach and getting them to say yes and actually executing a network meeting, it takes a lot of time, energy, and effort. The objective of Career Happy Hour that happens every Friday, 3 p.m. Pacific time, is so that people like Stephen can connect with Tracy and others that are here very organically, very easily, because my suspicion is Stephen would say yes if someone reached out. And I want everybody to know that that's true. And if it's not something that's true, then I would expect you to get back to me and say, hey, I reached out to this person and they were non-responsive or weren't willing to meet with me. Then I can have that conversation offline. But and so that's to set the table with the strong icebreaker. And then I talked about asking questions. Don't be afraid to ask questions. And then the last thing I'll talk about here in terms of sharing too much is, how eager. Part of this is your approach and your mindset, and how eager are you to be a part of that team? And am I appearing to be needing them more than they need me? Am I appearing like I have a love relationship with this company and my eyes are clouded over? So we really need to think about how we're showing up to these interviews and how we're positioning ourselves so that we can be seen as an employee, not as some needy individual that is really excited about being there, but not sharing the right information. So there is that caution. That a lot of times that just comes from nerves. And so if you're the type that has a lot of nerves and you have performance anxiety and you need some support that way, then please just take advantage of the interviewing intensive, and I'd be happy to support your success in every way possible. And the interview is never over. That's the other part of this that I maybe didn't mention. It doesn't have much to do with the topic we're talking about and how much to share at an interview, but the idea is the interview is never over. The hiring process for that requisition may be over, but you're interviewing, you're auditioning for the next role. You're auditioning for whatever role comes down the pipe a year from now, 2 years from now, 5 years from now. So if we think about it from that perspective, that this is just one opportunity at this company, some companies are very large, they have many opportunities. I want to leave every door open. I want to cross a bridge rather than burn it. And often we go through that hiring process. We get what I would just refer to as a declination letter for that requisition, not for the company or any other opportunities, but for that particular hire. I think that door is closed, and it's not. The door is only closed if you close it. Let me say that again. The door to an organization is only closed if you close it. Now, certainly there's circumstances that could come up, like if you broke the law or, something like that. That's different. But what I'm suggesting is often we defeat ourselves. We defeat ourselves by saying, oh, because they didn't hire me for this one, I'm not accessible or available or going to be qualified to do this other one. Or if there's one with the same title that comes down comes up like 2, 3, 4 months later, the same title, same part of the organization, they could be experiencing exponential growth. It might be that they interview you and funnel you into an opportunity that's a better fit. Wouldn't that be great? Wouldn't it be great that if you had a really good recruiter and they looked at your expertise and they said, wow, this person would actually be a better fit over here doing this kind of work. Would you be interested in that? Yes, please. So there's things to think about. Now, that the other thing is, if you make an impression on that recruiter, they may consider you for other opportunities. Yes, but if they ever leave that organization, which happens just as much as it does for any other job vertical inside an organization, is that recruiter is now at a company that's also on your target list, and they're not at the one that you were with or interviewed with prior. So always keep those doors open. Always do what you can to follow up until it's time to not follow up on a regular basis, right? So part of it is the follow-up could be part of the interview. And I always encourage people that, hey, until you get hired somewhere else, you're going to follow up with that person, that individual, that hiring team. The interview, funny enough, the interview is actually a networking conversation if you think about it. So let's say you don't get that role. No big deal. You had the opportunity to meet a hiring team at an organization you'd love to work for and determine firsthand whether or not you'd want to actually continue having dialogue with that organization. So go ahead and have dialogue, continue to have dialogue, stay connected with them on LinkedIn, just continue the conversation. Don't let it stop, right? Don't let it stop. Well, I don't see any other questions here. And it is been here about a half an hour sharing some ideas, some thoughts. Take it for what it's worth. And I'd certainly like to answer some of your questions, but I don't see any here. So I will call it a day. I didn't see any interesting news, just more of the same. So if there's a question that you have, you can certainly direct message me on LinkedIn. Just search Andrew Beach on LinkedIn and you can send me direct message, not a problem. Happy to incorporate or at least answer directly that question and that sort of thing. Oh, good. Stephen has a question. Okay. Thank you, Stephen. You saved me. Saved by the bell. A question before we get to the interview process. What if you're trying to make a connection with someone at a company, but if you don't have any first or second degree connections on LinkedIn, then you always go to the first degree connections first, second degree second, and then you go direct after that. The funny thing is, sometimes we don't think we know somebody there, but we actually do. We just don't believe they'll be helpful. And I've seen people actually get into organizations through finance when they were in marketing, or through accounting when they were actually in supply chain, right? So don't think that the contact that you have there isn't valuable. They may not even be on LinkedIn. They might be on Facebook or Instagram or some other tool. You'd be surprised how many hiring managers and business owners I know spend way more time on Facebook than they do on LinkedIn. There's a lot of them, or Instagram for that matter. So it just, we can't presume that the only way to get to somebody is through LinkedIn. It is an effective tool, and it is the professional presence for many people, but it's not the only place. And so I always am an advocate, Stephen, of using 5 different methods over the course of 10 days. So if I send a connect request to somebody and I don't get an answer, then I maybe look to see if I can find an email. If I can't find an email, I'm going to maybe phone call. I mean, so if you can do 5 different things, send an email, a phone call, a LinkedIn message, an in-mail, join a group with that person in it. If you do 5 things, maybe follow their profile instead of connecting, you will get noticed. And sometimes people just aren't in the frame of mind or aren't present enough to answer you at that time. So just be aware that not everybody is as dedicated and committed to your job search as you are. And that means, you need to do what you can to follow up with them, because they just may not find it a priority. And that's normal. I mean, that even happens with me. I mean, people reach out to me and I forget, and I need the follow-ups too. So none of us are perfect. We can make attempts to be perfect, but I don't believe any one of us is perfect that way. All right, folks, have a good weekend, and we'll see you next Career Happy Hour. Take care, stay safe, and be well. If you have any questions, please don't hesitate to direct message me on LinkedIn. Take care.